So, we are going to get started here while I'm giving you just a quick overview. Feel free to continue to introduce yourself, to letting us know who you are, where you're from, and a big dream that you have. Um, okay, so I am really excited to have all of you here today. And I'm excited to do this impromptu live Q&A on a topic that I've been getting a bunch of questions about. So, how to dream big and ignore your inner critic. So, this is something that in lifestyle design we talk a lot about, but it can be the most nebulous part of the lifestyle design process, right? How do we actually do it, right? How do we actually dream big? Especially when we have this inner critics, constantly butting in and saying like all of the reasons why something won't work. And so this is exactly what we're going to talk about today. So what we're going to do is sort of walk through, how to dream big and to ignore your inner critic. And if you have questions throughout this, I would encourage you to drop those in the comments, and I'll try to get to as many questions as I possibly can. And I'm also going to be asking you to engage in conversation or let me know about something that you're, thinking about or your answer to something specific. So when I do that, please drop that in the comment box so that we can engage together. So, first, what I want to do is tell you just a little bit about who I am. I would say most of you here probably know. So, I'll do a really quick overview. I am a full time human being and I am an adventurer, a part time van lifer. I love to hike. I am a sourdough pizza enthusiast, um, a dog mom, and I also work part time on my own business, writing, speaking, and coaching, and the co founder of the Pioneers. And we believe that the journey to FI should be as remarkable as the destination. And so we're focused on both building financial freedom and designing lives that we truly love all along the way. One thing that I want to point out here is, and I actually had a conversation with someone today about how they felt like they weren't really sure, like, what was their identity outside of work and outside of their career, and that's something that we talk about a lot, and that's one of the reasons why I like to lead with the fact that I'm an adventurer and a van lifer, and I love to hike, and I love sourdough, right? All of those things are important parts of my identity that have absolutely nothing to do with the way that I make money. Right. And so part of this process of lifestyle design and building a life that you want is to figure out who you are disconnected from the work that you do, or specifically the work that you do for money. So, what are we going to talk about tonight? So we're going to talk about a few things. So one is how to create the conditions in your life to dream big. And then the second is the concrete action steps to take to brainstorm new ideas and dreams. Okay. And then the last thing that we're going to do is talk about an opportunity to join a group that will help you dream even bigger. So, what I always do for every single conversation that I have is I want you to listen to this workshop or this Q&A, right? Whatever we're calling it. I would like you to commit to taking some sort of action coming out of this. It could be a small action, it could be a large action. Okay. But what I want to see is some yeses and pinky promises and hell yes in the chat box, that knowing that you're coming to this, trying to glean information from it so that you can take action rather than just passively consuming it. Okay. So, do you promise to take some sort of action coming out of this? And I'm starting to see some yeses. Awesome. Really, really excited to see the things that you do coming out of this. So, what I want to do first is to anchor this conversation about dreaming big into the overall lifestyle design process. Okay, so let me just quickly walk you through that process so that we can orient ourselves for what we're going to be diving into. So, lifestyle design is a three-stage process, and I think of it as a process because it's something that sort of continues, right, over and over and over. Okay, so the first stage, we identify the elements of our ideal life. Okay, and in this stage, I think of this as you're creating your compass, right? So you're figuring out what are the things that I truly love to do? What are my core motivations? Like, what are the things that get me excited to get out of bed in the morning? And or what are the things that frustrate the hell out of me that those things are really good indications of the things that you're passionate about. Okay? So we have your what, your why, and your how. And the how I think of as the conditions that you need that are optimal for you to be able to thrive. So, for you to be able to carry out your what and your why in a way that actually feels really good. Okay. And I think the importance of this compass that you're creating is to one, you have a lens through which you can evaluate new opportunities, right? And as you brainstorm ideas, you can say, okay, does this thing align with what I really want and how I how I work best and how the conditions that I need to be able to thrive. Okay. And then the second thing is it provides you with a foundation to use as a launching off point to be able to dream big. Right. So if you have specific ideas of, okay, here's the things that I like to do, and here are my core motivations, at that point, we can start to brainstorm ideas, right? That will help that will allow you to move forward and do some really interesting things that will help you to build this life that you truly love, that you find meaning and purpose and joy from. Okay. So we're going to dive into this dreaming big stage a little bit more in a second. And then once you dream big, then we move into this experimentation stage, right? So this is the part of the process where you take your big idea, you figure out how can I start to experiment with this so that I'm able to learn, answer the questions, build my confidence, determine the ways that I want to move and adjust all along the path. And then all of this feeds back into it. So feeds back in to then your ability to refine your compass, right? Refine these elements of your ideal life and then dream even bigger and have more information about yourself. Okay. So we're going to dive in here to the process of dreaming big about what you really want. So the first question that I actually want to ask all of you is, do you struggle with your inner critic? So every time you come up with a new idea, do you have that voice in your head that tells you all the reasons why something won't work? If that's true for you, I would drop a 1 in the chat, and just let us know. Because I think part of this I think is helpful is to realize that, like, every single one of us has this inner critic, right? Every single one of us struggles with this, but then it's figuring out how do we work with it and manage it so that we're able to move forward, and that we're able to, right, move through the discomfort, right, of this inner critic. I'm seeing some ones in the chat box, so we are not alone in this struggle with our inner critic. So the first thing that I actually want to talk about here is how do we actually cultivate this dreamer mindset, right? Because I think part of it is right, part of it is the actions that we can take, but part of it also is creating this mindset for ourselves that focuses on the possibilities. And so one thing that I actually really, really love when I'm thinking about the cultivating this dreamer mindset, and I use this in my coaching program as well, is something called the Disney creative strategy. And I love this because at Disney, when anytime they're doing something, creating something, they've sort of publicized this process, which breaks the creative process into three distinct segments. Okay. There's a dreamer phase, right? And that's where you're coming up with all of the new ideas, you're brainstorming, um, right? And you're focusing on creation. Then there's the realist phase. That's where you plan. That's where you say, okay, how does this work? How would we make this happen? Right. And then you have the critic phase. Right. And there is a place for that. There's a place for, okay, let's create the plan. Let's figure out let's figure out what we would do with it. Now let's poke holes. Right. Let's figure out what the pitfalls could be so that we are able to move forward and, anticipate some of those things. Okay. But I think the key here is that each of those stages of the process has a container. Right. And so there's this dreamer phase container where you're saying, in this phase, I am only dreaming. I'm not planning. I'm not critiquing. And I'm going to try to notice when I start to plan and critique. And I'm gonna come back to the dreaming phase. Okay, so I actually think that, like, building mindfulness skills can actually be really helpful with this. So, for example, if anyone here has done any sort of mindfulness or meditation, right, a lot of the focus is focus on the breath, right? And the idea isn't necessarily like, "Oh, I have to have a fully clear mind, it's a blank slate, focus, in and out on the breath." It's more so that you're focusing on something, regardless of what it is, and then you're noticing when you're straying from that focus, and you're able to bring yourself back to it, right? And I think that's really helpful in this dreamer phase because you start to notice, "Oh, I'm starting to critique," or "I'm starting to plan here." And then you can bring yourself back to that dreamer phase. Okay. And I would say it's really helpful also to be doing this process with a community as well, who's also coming at this with this dreamer mindset, because they can also help point out if you're starting to get into that critique or planning when we're in that dreamer phase. So then there's a couple other things sort of going along with this that I would encourage you to think about during this process is in this dreamer phase, try to do everything that you can to let go of the shoulds. So in my coaching programs, we actually joke about having a should jar where, like, we want to notice every single time we say should, because that's like, whenever we're shoulding ourselves, it's a really good indication of something where we feel like there's something external, like there's an external expectation that we need to abide by versus something that we really want. And so if you find yourself saying should or thinking it, right, it's always good to reframe that and say, but what do I really want in this situation? Okay. The next thing is to try to focus on the possibilities and the potential. Right. So instead of, your inner critic coming in and saying, but that could never work because of XYZ, like try to set that aside, during this dreaming phase. And also know that there is a time and space for that. It's just not right now, right? In this phase. And then the last thing that I'll say on cultivating this dreamer mindset is I like to think of improv, right? So improv theater has this yes and approach, right? And the whole idea behind it is that every single thing that people are doing in improv is they're saying yes to the thing that the person just said or did, and they're building on it, right? And that's exactly what we want to be doing in the dreamer phase, especially if we're doing this in the context with other people. Because people can be like throwing out ideas and brainstorming, and the most difficult thing is when somebody says, oh no, but that's not going to work because of XYZ thing. That immediately shuts down the brainstorming, right? Just like it shuts down the improv show. And so what we want to do is say, okay, this may or may not be an idea I want to move forward with, right? I'm not evaluating this right now. I'm going to go with it and say yes, and let's build on it, right? Let's build on it and see what other new ideas can come out of this. This may not be the thing, but it may make, someone else think of something and me think of something else and something else. And maybe that's the idea that you want to move forward toward. But if we shut down the ideas, we'll never get to that idea. Okay? So these are the ways that we can cultivate this dreamer mindset. So what I want to do actually is turn to you all and hear which of these strategies or approaches or mindsets, like, do you feel like would be most helpful for you? So the letting go of shoulds, the focusing on possibilities, the creation of the container for the dreaming phase, or taking this improv approach of yes and constantly building on the next idea. So I'll wait for a second to hear some responses from you. I would say for me, I think one thing that's so incredibly helpful is like having the container for this and reminding myself that like there will be a time for planning and there will be a time to, poke holes in it, but like that time isn't now, right? Let me sort of move forward with this dreaming and brainstorming, and I can figure out the specifics later. Yeah, I'm seeing a couple comments. So I see someone, Connie, saying that she needs a should jar. Yeah, I feel like the like recognition of when we're shoulding on ourselves is, incredibly important. And then AJ focusing on possibilities, and Jane the yes and approach. So constantly um, building on the next idea. Awesome. Okay, so then the next thing that you can do to sort of create the foundation for this dreamer mindset and like setting the stage to dream big is to create the context that will allow you to do this. Okay? And so I think of two main things to help you create that context. The first one is people can do things that they haven't seen other people do, but it's a lot more challenging, right? And so if you can expose yourself to new ideas and different ways of living, different lifestyle designs, you can start to see them potentially being a reality in your own life a lot earlier. And so one thing that I would say is I used to like read blogs and listen to podcasts and, all of those things. And I used to think like, oh, these people are so much different from me, right? They're these like larger than life personalities. And finally, when I actually met some of them in real life, I was like, oh, these are regular, real people, just like me. Right. And this thing that they're doing isn't so out of reach for me. And so I think it's important to expose ourselves to these new ideas and options, as well as start to build this like minded community of people who are on these similar paths, that will actively help to push you forward and inspire you in this process. Let's see. I'm seeing a couple other comments in the chat. So yeah, I see a comment from Nicole saying that my husband is the dreamer, and I've always seen my job as being the realist. Um, I think that's a really important thing to recognize that like we all can be dreamers, um, and we can all be realists as well. Um, and that it's incredibly helpful and valuable if you're both in a dreaming stage, together, and you can sort of set the expectations for that. That's like, "We're in the dreaming phase right now. We're going to, we're not planning it out. We're not, poking holes in it. We're just dreaming." And then we'll come back, and try to figure out, how to make it happen if we decide it is a thing that we want to pursue. And I think that's the key is you're going to come up with a whole bunch of different ideas. And so there's no point in poking holes in them if you haven't decided you want to do the thing yet. So, okay. Awesome. So from here, what I want to do is dive into the strategies. Okay. And the first question that I want to ask as we get into this actually is, do you feel like I saw Nicole say, like, I feel like I'm the realist, right? I'm curious if you feel like are you the pragmatic person who feels like you struggle to dream big? And if you feel like this is you, like if I any of these things that I say describe you, drop a one in the chat. And I'm curious, so like if I start talking about like brainstorming and mind mapping and dreaming big and all of these things, like do you feel like your eyes glaze over and you have no idea what I'm even talking about? Like what would that even look like? Like what would a process to do this even look like? Um, if that's you, drop a 1, in the chat box. And so one thing that I'll say is I actually was in a very similar place. So if you're feeling like this is true for you, it was definitely true for me. So when I first, like, heard about all of this, I was in a place where like, I didn't even it didn't even feel worth it to me to try to dream big because I was in this toxic job. I didn't see any other possibilities, or if I did see other possibilities, I felt like, well, I could never do that anyway, so why even think about it, right? And it took me a long time to sort of get to a place where I was ready to jump into these strategies and to realize that there were like strategies that actually existed to help get some of those desires and the dreams that we have like out of our brains and onto a paper. And I tend to also be a pretty right-brained person. And so, when people start talking about brainstorming and mind mapping, I'm like, yeah, but I don't know if that's really gonna like work. Right. And so I'm excited to be able to share some of these strategies coming from the perspective of someone who is the like right-brained, pragmatic, wanting to poke holes in things, and really needing to work through and work sort of against that tendency to be able to dream big. Okay. So one of the strategies, and actually what I want to walk you through here, is this is the process that I walk through with my coaching clients in Design a Life You Love. So there's a few different strategies that we use. So the first one is mind mapping, right? So you see this page, right? And to you, this may look like a whole bunch of chaos. But what I will say is there is a method to the madness here. And mind mapping is actually a great way to start getting what's in your head out onto paper and start coming up with new ideas in a way that helps to set that inner critic to the side. Okay. So the process for mind mapping, how it goes, is first In my coaching program, you choose so we talked about in the stage 1, right? You come up with those elements of your ideal life, your what you love to do, right? Your core motivations, your why, and then your how, which is the conditions that you need to thrive. Okay, so I have people in my coaching programs choose one key element from each of those things, and start a mind map related to that. Okay, so if you look at my previous mind map, this is actually a mind map that I did when I went through this same lifestyle design process. And adventure was my what from that, right? So adventure was what was the thing that I wanted to walk through. Okay. So you start with three distinct ideas of things that are really important to you. Okay. And so to create your mind map, what you do is you start with that word in the middle of the paper, and then sort of draw 5 or 6 lines out from that and write down the first things that come into your mind related to that. Okay. And then you draw, 3 to 6 lines from each of those things and write down new words that come to your mind associated with those particular words, and they don't have to be related back to that original word, which was adventure. Okay. And you do this for a couple of rounds, um, until you have like 3 to 4 rings of word associations. Okay. So you have a whole bunch of just words and ideas out there that are coming out of your brain and getting onto a paper. Okay. And in order to do this, what I actually recommend, is I think sometimes we can overthink it, right? And then that makes it a lot harder that it's like, oh, do I really want this to be the word that I think about for adventure? Like, let's take that out of the equation. So set a timer for like 5 minutes, 5 or 6 minutes, and do this as fast as you possibly can. So like what are the words that are coming out of your mind, right? And just write those down on paper as fast as you can. Okay. So then, right, you walk away, you have this mind map that looks like a whole bunch of chaos, right? And then what you want to do is process it. Okay. So, what you're going to do then is you're going to read it over. You're going to look at every word that you wrote down, especially those in that outer ring. Okay. And then what you're going to do is see like what words stick out to me from this mind map, right? What are things that feel like they're literally like jumping off the page that like I need to pay attention to, right, in this moment. Okay. And you're going to sort of star those things and note that like, okay, those are the things that are jumping out to me. um and then from there you have your 3 to 4 words, right? And so then you say, okay, I'm going to brainstorm different types of activities that pull together these 3 or 4 different distinct ideas, right? Of things that you would enjoy, of types of work that you could possibly do. And from there, you sort of create like, what are sort of like fictitious jobs or activities that I could do? Okay. I know it sounds funny, but helps us come up with so many ideas. Okay. So let me give you an example from my mind map about adventure. I choose it's funny I put that I chose 3 words, but I actually chose 4, here, and from that mind map, I chose food, friends, travel, and slow. So those were the 4 words that stuck out to me. And some of my potential activities were like, maybe I could be an Airbnb host or host like Airbnb experiences, or I could research places and plan group trips for my friends. Or I could go stay and live somewhere for 1 to 3 months and like really get immersed in that place where I'm living, and then have people come and join me for like the last week I'm going to be in that place so that I can show them everything that I've learned and everything that the city has to offer. Right. So those were just some of the ideas that I came up with. And the like fictitious job title that I created, sort of related to this last one, was to be like a slow travel guide. So slow travel myself and then invite friends and family and people to come and enjoy these experiences with me. Okay. So this is an example of a mind map that you might create. Typically in my coaching programs, people will create 3 or 4 different mind maps. So you're walking, away with, 10 to 12 different distinct ideas that you're brainstorming and working on pulling together. Okay? So then from there, I recommend doing brainstorming, and I recommend doing brainstorming with a group of people, right? Because I think there's only so far that we're gonna get by ourselves, in terms of brainstorming. Like, other people are gonna come up with new ideas that are, as we talked about, are gonna spark different and new ideas for you. And so having a like-minded group of people who can be in this dreamer phase with you, can help you come up with so many different ideas. Okay. So what I want to do here is just quickly define what brainstorming actually is, because I think sometimes we don't always know, right, exactly like what it is and how to do it. Okay. So I think of, so brainstorming is coming up with as many ideas as possible without judgment or evaluating those ideas as you go. Okay. So this is important, right? It's not just coming up with some ideas, it's coming up with as many ideas as possible and doing it without judgment or evaluation. Okay. So this framing also is saying, okay, I am in a brainstorming phase right now, and I am going to come up with as many ideas as possible, and I'm not going to judge or evaluate them. And I know I'm saying this a lot, but I think it's important to get it through, into our brains. Okay. And so brainstorming and approaching idea generation in this way is beneficial for a number of reasons, right? So it can help us get unstuck, right? If we don't evaluate, um, it helps us to stop agonizing over finding the like one right idea. There's lots and lots and lots of ideas that we could be really happy to pursue. It helps us to focus on the possibilities. It allows us to let one idea lead to the next. It helps to silence our inner critic. And when we have more choices, it enables us to make better choices, right? Instead of just taking one idea and iterating on it, it gives us more options so that we can choose better. Okay. So I actually want to pause here. And I imagine that I know the answer, to this question for most of us, but I actually want to hear from you. Drop a 1 in the chat if you feel like brainstorming and coming up with a whole bunch of ideas, right? As many ideas as possible without judgment or evaluation would be helpful for you. Um, and you can tell us in the chat. So drop a 1 and then tell us why. So of these ideas on the right, like what do you think would be the most helpful for you? Why would it help you and support you as you move forward? I see some people dropping ones. So brainstorming, yes, indeed, without judgment, as many ideas as possible. And I'd love to hear from a couple folks if they're like, why do you feel like it would be helpful for you? So for me, I feel like the most helpful thing about brainstorming, especially doing it with other people, is this letting one idea lead to the next, to the next, to the next, right? So for example, right, my original idea on the mind mapping activity that I did was, right, this slow travel guide. And when we were brainstorming, right, and coming up with as many ideas as possible, my group helped me realize that, like, maybe I want to lead retreats. What if I wanted to lead retreats about lifestyle design? I could be a coach focused on lifestyle design, right? All of that, as well as potentially traveling around in a van and inviting people to come to some of the locations that, I would love to travel to and share with other people. And those were some of the ideas that led me to doing exactly what I'm doing today that I would have probably not come up with all on my own. Okay. I see AJ saying brainstorm would help you stop agonizing over finding the one right idea. Yeah, yeah, and I think just so incredibly important. Um, okay. So in my coaching program, we focus a full session on brainstorming and the mind map. So people come with, right, here's their 10 to 12 words, here's the different activities that they've brainstormed. And then let's bring all of those together and brainstorm as many ideas as we possibly can for things that they could do related to those things. And we come up with a bunch of wild um, and crazy ideas. Um, let's see, I'm seeing a question. Yeah. Okay. So Nicole talking about how brainstorming would be helpful. So challenging to get started. But once you build the skill, it would be a great skill to helping overcome the inner critic. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a skill to build and a muscle. And I think it's also incredibly valuable to, have other people who can help keep you in this dreamer phase during the process. Awesome. Okay. And then I would say this last um, quote comes from one of my favorite books. So designers have lots of wild ideas because they know that the number one enemy of creativity is judgment. And so I wanted to share that with you. So after we brainstorm a whole bunch of ideas, the next thing that people do is, as part of my coaching program, is to create 3 distinct life plans. Okay. And these are continued brainstorming. So then we're starting to think, okay, I have these ideas, but let me start to brainstorm how would they fit into my life and when could they happen? And, what could that possibly look like? Okay. And so the 3 life plans are: life 1 is, here's an idea that I already have in mind, right? This is something I'm noodling on, right? Or this is my current life extended forward. Okay. Life 2 is where people start to get really creative. Okay. So this is, imagine the main component of life 1, right? Whatever that is no longer an option. So no one needs that thing anymore. It doesn't exist, right? Imagine that's the case. And if that were true, what would you do instead? Right. And so this helps us to sort of get out of this place where we're taking one idea and iterating on it. Because I think that's the tendency of most of us, is to just iterate on this one idea that we have. So we're saying, okay, that first idea, that is no longer an option. What would I do instead? And then life 3 that you brainstorm is, what would you do if money or status were no object? Okay. And then this is where we start to get really creative. And it's less of, it's not the question of if you won the lottery, right? And it's more the question of, if I could immediately generate enough, right? What I need, like doing whatever it is, and no one would think any less of me, what would I do? And that's life 3. Okay. And so I'll actually pull this up here. These are the 3 life plans, just an example of from when I went through this process in 2019. And as you'll see, you do actually map out what would you do year by year. Okay. And I can actually show you Like, this is what we go through in my coaching program, right? So people are mapping out, what would I be doing in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for each of those life plans. And then after the creation, we start to get into a little bit of that evaluation phase to say, what are the resources I already have available to me for this? How much do I actually like this? What's my confidence? Like, is this coherent with who I am and what I want? And then we start to ask some questions about and figure out, what do we want to know about this? What are some of those questions that we have? Okay. So I want to share a few things for you to keep in mind as you're moving through this dreaming phase. Okay. So the first thing is that to remember is, I think sometimes many of us find it challenging, and you can drop a 1 in the chat if this is you, is I used to feel like if I wrote something down that I was like committing to it. And so I was hesitant to write things down because I felt like, oh, if I write it down, like I'm going to have to do all of the things on the list. Right. So when you're dreaming big and when you're brainstorming, you are not committing to any of these things. You are coming up with a whole bunch of ideas, and you get to choose which ones you want to move forward with. Okay. So this removes some of that pressure. Okay. And then next, try do your best, right? And notice when that inner critic is coming out, to not judge and try to not evaluate in this process. And then don't overthink it, right? Like, if you need to, the strategy that works well for me is like set a timer and try to do it fast. Because if you do something fast, then it sort of takes the overthinking component out of it. Okay. And then also, so when your inner critic does try to speak up, one thing that I would encourage you to do, so if we talked about this, like noticing it and letting it go. Another thing that you could do as well in this process is figure out how to turn that critique into a question. Right. So as you start to come up with ideas, you might have questions of like, well, I could never make money doing that. Right. So instead of that, what if you turned that into a question and said, how do people make money doing this? Are there people who are making money that doing this? How much? What's required for that? Or your inner critic saying like, you could never do that, you're not an expert, right? So it could be turned into a question of, well, what is actually required to do this? What kind of qualifications, and how do people actually go about learning this, right? And so instead of having those be critiques that keep you from moving forward, you can turn them into questions that help to fuel your experimentation. Okay. So we're going to wrap up here in a second, but let's talk through a little bit. So today we covered how to create the conditions to dream big, the action steps that you can take to brainstorm these new ideas and dreams. And so now we're going to talk about the opportunity. So for those who are here, and if you feel like working through this process in the context of a supportive community and having the accountability and people to help you dream big, in this process, I would like to tell you more about my signature group coaching program, Design a Life You Love, where you create these foundations to dream big and you work through this entire mind mapping, group brainstorming, and life planning process as you then move into that experimentation phase. Okay. So in Design a Life You Love, we work through this full lifestyle design process, right? So we spend time in the first 8 weeks of the program focusing on creating your compass, right? Figuring out what those elements of your ideal life are, your what, your why, and your how. Okay. And then we use that as the launching off point to dream big. Okay. So we focus on and we do these mind maps and life plans and group brainstorming. And you walk away from this stage with those three different distinct life plans that you could experiment with and explore. Okay. And then in stage 3, we then figure out, okay, what are all of the questions that we have about those different ideas? And what are the actions that we could take to experiment and to figure out the answers to those questions, to learn more and to build our confidence? Okay. And then all of this comes back and helps you to refine the elements of your ideal life and dream even bigger. Okay. So over the course of this 4-month group coaching program, um, the group sessions are every other week with a small group of like minded people. Okay. So each group has 3 to 4 people in it. So you're able to dive really deep together and have a lot of time for ideas and insights and brainstorming with this group of people. During this process, you get access to the whole suite of lifestyle design resources with pre work and reflection and everything throughout the program. And I match you up with an accountability partner for thought partnership and accountability between the meetings. Okay, so you get to continue your learning through those conversations. And then you get access to the online platform to build community with other participants in your group, as well as people in other groups and alumni of the program who might be a few steps further along in their process. Okay, and so by the time you complete this program, so by the time we get to January, you will have built a supportive community that can push you forward. Identify what you uniquely value through reflection and experimentation. You'll relearn to dream big and work through this full process to figure out what the future can hold for you. You'll then move from ideas to action. So you won't just stay in your head, right, in that ideas stage. And you'll apply strategies to overcome the barriers and limiting beliefs that hold you back. So if this is something that sounds like it's of interest to you, I would encourage you to check it out. The doors are open this week only, and the doors will close on Friday at midnight. So if this is something you're interested in, reach out to me by then to let me know. And we'll have a conversation to see if this program would be a good match for you. So this is the page. You can read through the entire program. And if you click the link saying like, yes, I want in, what that's going to do is bring you to a messenger chat with me, or you can feel free to send me an email as well. And we'll talk to see if the program is a good match for you. If it is, I'll tell you more. We'll have that conversation. If it isn't, I'll be honest with you about that as well and point you to other resources. So I would encourage you to take a look at this. Reach out to me and I'll just give you a quick recap. So in the program, it's 4 months of group coaching, working through the full lifestyle design process, matching with an accountability partner, access to that online forum, action planning templates, access to me through Instant Messenger, through our online platform as well. So yeah, thank you so much for being here this evening. And if this is something that would be helpful for you, I look forward to talking with you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I hope that we can all leave here and cultivate this dreamer mindset and start to brainstorm new ideas for what we could want to do in the future. So thank you so much. And I will talk to you all later.